Garrett handed me his phone showing my Instagram account with 2.3 million followers, the same account I'd been showing him for 3 years. What he didn't know was that I'd created this fake profile using purchase followers while my real account sat at 47 people, mostly bots. The look of pride in his eyes was about to become my biggest nightmare when he asked to post something from my account himself. The notification sound from my phone made Garrett look up from his laptop where he was working on quarterly reports for his accounting firm. "Another brand deal?" he asked with the same proud smile he'd been giving me for 3 years whenever my phone buzzed with what he believed were lucrative partnership offers. I glanced at the screen showing a spam message about male enhancement pills and quickly dismissed it. "Just some boring admin stuff," I replied, placing my phone face down on our marble kitchen counter that I'd convinced him we could afford because of my supposed influencer income. Garrett had no idea that our entire lifestyle was funded by credit cards I'd been systematically maxing out, while pretending to earn millions from my social media presence. In his mind, I was Sienna, a successful lifestyle influencer with 2.3 million followers who partnered with luxury brands and earned 6 figures monthly from sponsored content. In reality, I was Sienna, a community college dropout with 47 followers who spent her days staging elaborate photo shoots in department stores and hotel lobbies to maintain the illusion of success. "I've been thinking," Garrett said, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention. "Maybe it's time I started learning more about your business. You've been so successful, and I feel like I don't understand enough about the influencer industry to really appreciate what you've built." This was exactly the conversation I'd been dreading for months. Garrett's natural curiosity about my work was becoming harder to deflect with vague answers about algorithm changes and brand confidentiality agreements. "There's really not much to understand," I replied, moving around our kitchen island to avoid his direct gaze. "It's mostly just posting pretty pictures and writing captions. Nothing as complex as your accounting work." Garrett made $78,000 annually as a CPA. A respectable income that had seemed adequate when we'd started dating 4 years ago. But after creating my influencer persona, I'd convinced him that my earnings were so substantial that we could afford a lifestyle far beyond his salary. "But the business side must be complicated," Garrett persisted. "Managing partnerships with all those brands, negotiating contracts, handling taxes on that kind of income. I could help you organize the financial aspects more efficiently." The irony of my accountant husband offering to help manage finances that didn't exist made my stomach clench. For 3 years, I'd been telling him that my income was handled by a management team that preferred to keep business details confidential. "My manager handles all of that," I said, using my standard deflection. "She's very particular about keeping business information private. Something about protecting trade secrets and maintaining competitive advantages." This manager, theoretically named Vivian Cross, existed only in stories I'd created to explain why Garrett couldn't be more involved in my supposed career. Every month, I'd describe meetings with Vivian while actually spending afternoons at coffee shops researching how successful influencers actually operated their businesses. That evening, while Garrett worked late at his office, I sat in our walk-in closet surrounded by designer clothes I'd purchased with credit cards, preparing for the next day's content creation. The closet was my pride and accomplishment, filled with pieces from brands I claimed to have partnerships with, but had actually bought at full retail price. Each outfit represented hundreds of dollars charged to cards that Garrett believed I was paying off with influencer earnings. I developed an elaborate system for maintaining my deception. Every morning, I'd leave our apartment dressed professionally, claiming to have meetings with brands or photo shoots for sponsored content. Instead, I'd spend hours in luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, and designer boutiques, taking hundreds of photos that I'd post over the following weeks to create the impression of a constantly busy, successful lifestyle. The photos were carefully staged to hide price tags, avoid security cameras, and create backgrounds that suggested exclusive access to expensive locations. My fake Instagram account at Sienna Lifestyle showcased a curated world of luxury travel, designer fashion, and exclusive events. The 2.3 million followers were purchased from services that specialized in creating realistic fake audiences for people who wanted to appear more influential than they actually were. The engagement on my posts came from bots programmed to leave generic comments that looked authentic to casual observers like Garrett, who occasionally checked my account to see how his successful wife's business was progressing. The financial logistics of maintaining this deception had become increasingly complex. I'd opened 14 different credit cards over 3 years, using my supposed influencer income as justification for high credit limits. Every month, I'd make minimum payments using cash advances from other cards, creating a growing web of debt that I convinced myself I could somehow resolve before Garrett discovered the truth. The total amount owed was approaching $180,000, not including the interest charges that were compounding monthly. Creating fake business income for tax purposes required additional layers of deception. I'd established an LLC called Vail Media Group and filed tax returns showing substantial earnings that I claimed came from brand partnerships and affiliate marketing. The actual income for this business was zero, but I'd learned to manipulate financial documents well enough to satisfy Garrett's occasional questions about our tax situation. I'd convinced him that my management team handled most of the paperwork, limiting his access to details that would have revealed the fraud. Garrett's trust in my success had made him comfortable with lifestyle expenses that far exceeded his salary. We'd moved to a luxury apartment with rent of $4,200 monthly, which I'd convinced him was reasonable given my supposed earnings. I'd purchased a BMW with payments of $890 monthly, claiming it was essential for maintaining my professional image. Our monthly expenses for dining, entertainment, and shopping often exceeded $8,000, funded entirely by credit cards that Garrett believed I was paying with influencer income. The psychological toll of maintaining this elaborate deception was becoming harder to manage. I'd been lying for so long that sometimes I almost believed my own stories about brand partnerships and successful campaigns. I'd developed detailed backstories for fictional collaborations, complete with fake contract terms and payment schedules that I'd reference in conversations with Garrett. The line between my real identity and my influencer persona had become so blurred that I occasionally caught myself believing I actually was the successful person I'd created. 6 months into our 3rd year of this deception, Garrett suggested we should consider buying a house. With your income growth, we could probably afford something really nice, he said while browsing real estate websites during breakfast. Maybe something in the $800,000 range? The idea of taking on a mortgage based on my fictional income made me panic, but I couldn't express concerns without risking questions about why someone earning millions would worry about an $800,000 house payment. Maybe we should wait until next year, I suggested. I'm working on some major partnerships that could significantly increase my earnings. It might be smart to see how those develop before taking on a big financial commitment. This was my standard approach to delaying major decisions that would require financial verification I couldn't provide. I'd learned to frame delays as strategic business decisions, rather than attempts to avoid scrutiny. That makes sense, Garrett agreed. But maybe we should start looking at what's available, just to get an idea of the market. He'd been working extra hours to increase his savings contribution, believing that his income would be supplementary to mine in our future financial planning. The guilt of watching him sacrifice for a future based on lies was becoming harder to ignore, but I couldn't figure out how to end the deception without losing everything I'd gained. The fake influencer lifestyle had become addictive in ways I hadn't anticipated. The clothes, the restaurants, the constant acquisition of luxury items had created a dopamine cycle that made my real life feel inadequate by comparison. When I wasn't performing my influencer persona, I felt ordinary and unsuccessful, which drove me to spend more money on maintaining the illusion of success. The credit card debt was growing faster than I could manage, but stopping the spending would mean admitting that my lifestyle was unsustainable. Creating content for my fake account required increasing amounts of time and creativity. I'd spend entire days planning outfits, scouting locations, and taking photographs that would support my claims of success and luxury access. The time investment was equivalent to a full-time job, but without any actual income to show for the effort. Meanwhile, Garrett worked long hours at his legitimate career, contributing real money to our household while I contributed elaborate fiction. The relationship between my real account and my fake account required careful management to prevent discovery. My real Instagram at sienna had 47 followers and featured ordinary photos of coffee cups and sunset shots. I'd made it private and told Garrett it was a personal account I used for close friends, separate from my business presence. He'd never asked to follow it, assuming that my professional account was the one worth seeing. The contrast between the two accounts was so stark that even brief exposure to my real social media presence would have revealed the entire deception. 8 months later, Garrett mentioned that his sister Brooke was interested in working with influencers for her jewelry business. I told her about your success, and she's wondering if you might be interested in a partnership, he said excitedly. It would be great if my wife could help promote my sister's business. The idea of trying to convince Garrett's sister that I was a legitimate influencer made me sick with anxiety, since family members would be much harder to deceive than casual observers. I'd love to help Brooke, I lied. But my current contracts have exclusivity clauses for jewelry partnerships. Maybe once those expire, we could explore something together. This was another fabricated business constraint I'd learned to use when avoiding situations that would expose my deception. I'd created an elaborate web of supposed contractual obligations that explained why I couldn't pursue obviously beneficial opportunities. Brooke's interest in my supposed influence led to more detailed conversations about my business during family gatherings. She'd ask specific questions about engagement rates, audience demographics, and partnership terms that required increasingly creative responses. I'd spent hours researching industry terminology and typical business practices to sound credible during these conversations, but each interaction increased the risk of saying something that would contradict my previous claims. Brooke mentioned that most influencers your size work with talent agents. Garrett told me after a family dinner where his sister had been particularly curious about my business operations. She was surprised that you manage everything yourself. Maybe you should consider getting professional representation to help grow your business even more. The suggestion of involving outside professionals, who would require real documentation, made me realize how precarious my situation had become. I've been considering it, I replied, which was true in the sense that I'd been considering how to avoid it. But I like maintaining personal control over my brand. Some influencers lose their authenticity when they become too corporate. I'd learned to frame my isolation as a business philosophy rather than necessity for maintaining deception. The more people involved in my supposed career, the harder it would be to control the narrative. 2 months before Christmas of our 3rd year together, Garrett surprised me with the announcement that he'd booked us a vacation to Dubai. I want to celebrate your success, he said, showing me confirmation emails for a luxury resort that cost $8,000 for 5 nights. You've worked so hard building your business, and I think we should enjoy the rewards together. The trip was funded by his savings and a bonus from his accounting firm, money he'd earned through legitimate work while I'd been living off credit card fraud. That's incredibly generous, I said, though the trip made me nervous about maintaining my influencer persona in an unfamiliar environment. But are you sure we should spend that much? Maybe we could do something less expensive and save the money for the house fund. I was hoping to discourage the trip without seeming ungrateful, since spending a week pretending to be a successful influencer while with Garrett constantly would be nearly impossible to maintain. Sienna, you make more in a month than I make in a year, Garrett laughed. We can definitely afford a nice vacation. Besides, won't this be great content for your account? Your followers love travel posts. He was right that travel content was popular with influencers, and my fake account did feature photos from expensive destinations. What he didn't know was that those travel photos were taken during day trips to luxury hotels where I'd pose in lobbies and restaurants before leaving without staying overnight. The Dubai trip would require me to maintain my influencer persona 24 hours a day for 5 consecutive days, while sharing the experience with someone who believed my lifestyle was funded by legitimate business success. I'd have to continue taking staged photos, posting content, and discussing my supposed business calls and partnerships while under constant observation by the person I'd been deceiving for 3 years. During the flight to Dubai, Garrett spent hours scrolling through my Instagram account, commenting on posts I'd made during the previous months. This partnership with that skincare brand must have been huge, he said, referring to a post where I'd featured products I'd purchased at full retail price. The engagement numbers are incredible. You must be one of their most successful collaborators. I watched him analyze engagement metrics that were generated by bots, feeling sick about how thoroughly I'd convinced him of my success. The skincare industry is really competitive right now, I replied, trying to sound knowledgeable about a business relationship that existed only in my imagination. But working with established brands helps build credibility for future partnerships. Every conversation about my supposed career required me to remember previous lies and build upon them consistently, creating an increasingly complex web of fiction that was becoming harder to maintain. Our hotel in Dubai was luxurious beyond anything I'd experienced, and Garrett's excitement about sharing this experience made my deception feel even more cruel. He'd worked overtime for months to save money for this trip, believing he was celebrating my success while actually funding a vacation for someone who'd been systematically lying to him about every aspect of her career and financial contribution to their relationship. On our third day in Dubai, while Garrett was taking a business call with his office, I sat by the hotel pool trying to create content for my fake account. The photos needed to look natural and spontaneous while actually being carefully staged to suggest the kind of exclusive access that justified my supposed influencer status. A woman at the next pool chair recognized me from my Instagram and approached to introduce herself. "Excuse me, are you Sienna Vale?" she asked excitedly. "I follow your account and love your content. I can't believe I'm meeting you in person." This was my worst nightmare, being recognized by someone who followed my fake account while I was with Garrett. If she mentioned specific posts or asked detailed questions about my business, the entire deception could unravel in front of the person I'd been lying to for 3 years. "Thank you so much," I replied, trying to appear gracious while internally panicking. "That's so sweet of you to say." The woman, who introduced herself as Jessica, was a legitimate lifestyle influencer with 400,000 followers who'd been following my fake account for several months. She began asking specific questions about my posting schedule, content creation process, and business partnerships that required immediate creative responses. Garrett returned from his phone call to find me in animated conversation with Jessica about influencer industry topics. "This is my husband Garrett," I told Jessica, hoping to redirect the conversation away from business details. "And this is Jessica, another influencer who works in the lifestyle space." Garrett was clearly excited to meet someone else in my supposed industry, and he began asking Jessica questions about her work that made direct comparisons to my fictional business. "Sienna's account is incredible," Jessica told Garrett. "The engagement rates are amazing, and her content quality is so consistent. She must have an incredible team supporting her." Garrett beamed with pride, while I tried to figure out how to end this conversation before Jessica said something that would contradict my previous claims about working alone. "Actually, I mostly work solo," I said, hoping to align my response with what I told Garrett. "I prefer maintaining personal control over my content and business relationships." Jessica looked surprised, since influencers with 2.3 million followers typically required substantial team support, but she didn't pursue the topic further. That evening, Garrett couldn't stop talking about meeting Jessica, and how impressed he was by my professional reputation among other influencers. "It's incredible that someone with 400,000 followers was so excited to meet you," he said over dinner. "She clearly respects your work and sees you as someone to aspire to." The irony that Jessica had more legitimate influence than I'd ever had made the conversation particularly painful. "The influencer community is very supportive," I replied, which was true based on my research, though I'd never actually been part of it. "Everyone understands how challenging it can be to build and maintain an audience." This was another statement that sounded knowledgeable, but was based on articles I'd read rather than personal experience. On our last night in Dubai, Garrett suggested we should post something together on my account to commemorate the trip. "I know you usually keep your personal life private, but maybe just one photo of us together? Your followers would love to see the person who supports your career." The request made perfect sense from his perspective, but posting on my fake account while he watched would expose the entire deception. "My management team prefers that I keep personal content separate from business posts," I said, using my fictional manager as an excuse. "But I'd love to take some photos together for our personal memories." This satisfied Garrett's request for couple photos while avoiding the need to actually post anything on the account he believed was my primary business platform. The flight home from Dubai gave me time to think about how unsustainable my deception had become. The encounter with Jessica had shown how easily my fake influencer persona could be exposed by interaction with real industry professionals. Garrett's growing interest in my business meant he'd continue asking questions that required increasingly elaborate lies. The credit card debt was approaching $200,000, and the monthly minimum payments were becoming impossible to manage, even with cash advances. Back in our apartment, Garrett seemed more interested than ever in understanding my work and potentially becoming more involved in my business decisions. I've been thinking about what Jessica said about your engagement rates. He told me the morning after we returned. Maybe I could help analyze your metrics and identify opportunities for growth. I'm good with numbers and I'd love to contribute to your success. The offer was sweet and well-intentioned, but analyzing my fake metrics would immediately reveal that the engagement was artificial and the audience was purchased. That's really thoughtful, I replied. But the analytics are pretty specialized. It's not really traditional number analysis like what you do with accounting. I needed to discourage his involvement without seeming unappreciative of his desire to help. Maybe I could just learn the basics, Garrett persisted. You could teach me how to interpret the data, and then I could help you identify trends and opportunities you might not notice when you're focused on content creation. His enthusiasm for contributing to what he believed was our shared financial success made my deception feel particularly cruel. That afternoon, while Garrett was at work, I sat in our apartment calculating the total amount of debt I'd accumulated while pretending to be a successful influencer. The number was staggering. $197,000 across 14 credit cards, with monthly minimum payments that exceeded $4,800. My fictional influencer income could no longer cover even the interest charges, and I was running out of ways to obtain additional credit. For the first time in 3 years, I seriously considered telling Garrett the truth. The alternative was continuing to accumulate debt until the entire deception collapsed anyway, probably in a more dramatic and damaging way. But confessing would mean losing the lifestyle I'd become accustomed to, the respect I'd gained as his successful wife, and the future we'd planned based on my supposed earning potential. That evening, Garrett came home with news that made my situation even more complicated. I got a promotion, he announced excitedly. They're making me a partner at the firm, which comes with a significant salary increase and equity stake. I'll be earning almost $140,000 annually starting next month. The promotion was the result of his hard work and the financial stability he believed my income provided, allowing him to focus on career growth rather than immediate financial pressure. That's incredible, I said, though the news made me feel worse about my deception. You've worked so hard for this. Garrett's success was legitimate and earned, while my supposed achievements were entirely fabricated. His promotion would bring real money into our household, while my influencer career continued to drain resources through credit card debt. With both our incomes growing, maybe we should seriously consider that house purchase, Garrett suggested. The market is good right now, and we could probably afford something really special. The conversation I'd been avoiding for months was becoming unavoidable, as Garrett's legitimate success made larger financial commitments seem reasonable from his perspective. Let's celebrate your promotion first, I suggested, trying to delay conversations about major purchases that would require income verification I couldn't provide. Maybe we could plan another trip to mark this milestone in your career. I was hoping to redirect his focus away from financial planning and toward experiences that wouldn't require documentation of my fictional income. 3 weeks after Garrett's promotion, our financial situation reached a crisis point. I'd missed minimum payments on 3 credit cards, and the late fees and penalty interest rates had pushed my monthly obligations beyond what I could manage, even with cash advances. Collection calls were starting to come to our home phone, which Garrett might answer if I wasn't careful about screening calls. The stress of maintaining my deception while managing escalating debt was affecting my physical and mental health. I'd been losing weight from anxiety and had trouble sleeping due to constant worry about discovery. Garrett had noticed my stress but attributed it to work pressure and the challenges of managing a successful business. His attempts to comfort and support me made my guilt about deceiving him even more intense. On a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 3 years and 2 months after creating my fake influencer persona, Garrett made a request that would end everything. I want to surprise you with something special for our anniversary, he said. Could you give me access to your Instagram account? I'd like to post something romantic as a surprise, maybe a tribute to your success and our relationship. My hands started shaking as I processed what he was asking. Direct access to my Instagram account would immediately reveal that the profile he'd been admiring for 3 years was completely fabricated. He'd see the purchase followers, the bot engagement, and the lack of any actual business communications or partnership offers. There was no way to grant his request without exposing the entire deception. That's so thoughtful, I said, trying to buy time while my mind raced through possible responses. But my management team has very strict security policies about account access. I could lose my partnerships if anyone else posts from my account. This excuse had worked for smaller requests in the past, but Garrett's face showed disappointment and slight confusion about why his wife wouldn't trust him with something so simple. It would just be one post, he said. Surely Vivian would understand that this is for something personal and romantic. I'm your husband, not some random person. His reasonable request highlighted how unreasonable my refusal appeared, and I could see him starting to question why I was being so secretive about something that should be straightforward. Let me check with her first, I said, knowing that consulting my fictional manager would only delay the inevitable. Maybe there's a way to do it that wouldn't violate my contracts. Garrett agreed to wait for my response, but I could tell his confusion was growing into suspicion about why such a simple request was becoming complicated. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside a Starbucks, trying to figure out how to resolve a situation that had no good solution. I could continue making excuses about account access, but Garrett's suspicion would eventually lead to more direct questions about my business that I couldn't answer. I could confess the truth and face the immediate consequences of my deception, or I could try to maintain the lie while finding ways to satisfy his request without exposing my fake account. The option I chose was the most desperate and ultimately self-destructive. I decided to create an even more elaborate lie to explain why Garrett couldn't access my account. That evening, I told him that my management company had discovered security breaches affecting several of their high-profile clients, and all account access was temporarily restricted while they implemented new protection measures. How long will the restrictions last? Garrett asked, accepting my explanation but clearly disappointed about postponing his anniversary surprise. A few weeks? A month? I told him it could be several months depending on how quickly the security issues were resolved. This bought me time but created an expectation that normal account access would eventually resume. Over the following weeks, Garrett's questions about my work became more frequent and specific. He'd ask about meetings with Vivian that I claimed to attend, partnerships that should have been finalized, and business opportunities that I'd mentioned but never followed up on. Each question required additional lies, and I was running out of creative explanations for why my successful business seemed to have so many unusual constraints and complications. The breaking point came 6 weeks later, when Garrett announced that his sister Brooke had decided to hire an influencer marketing agency to help grow her jewelry business. She mentioned that she'd love to work with you once your exclusivity restrictions end, he said. The agency wants to review potential partners, and Brooke suggested they look at your account as an example of the kind of influencer she'd like to collaborate with. Professional marketing agencies would immediately recognize that my account was fake, from the purchase followers to the bot engagement to the complete lack of authentic business communications. If they investigated my account as a potential client example, they'd discover the fraud within hours and would certainly inform Brooke about their findings. That could be complicated, I said weakly, knowing that any professional scrutiny would expose everything. Maybe Brooke should focus on influencers who specialize specifically in jewelry content. My audience is more lifestyle general. But Garrett was excited about the possibility of his wife helping his sister's business, and he'd already told Brooke's agency contact to expect a review of my account. 3 days later, Garrett received a call from the marketing agency that destroyed my 3 years of careful deception in a 5-minute conversation. They said there are some irregularities with your account, he told me after hanging up, his voice hollow with confusion and growing realization. Something about unusual engagement patterns and follower demographics that don't match legitimate influence metrics. I tried to explain that different agencies use different analysis methods, and that some might not understand my specific audience development strategy. But Garrett was no longer listening to my excuses with the same trusting acceptance he'd shown for 3 years. Sienna, he said quietly, I need you to show me your real Instagram account. Not the business one. Your actual, personal account. The game was over. I couldn't produce real business documentation, real partnership communications, or real evidence of any income from influencer work because none of it existed. When I showed Garrett my actual Instagram account with 47 followers, He stared at the screen for several minutes without speaking. Then he asked me about the credit cards, the debt, the source of the money that had been funding our lifestyle for 3 years. How much? He asked after I confessed that everything had been financed with credit cards while I pretended to earn money as an influencer. How much debt have you accumulated? When I told him the number had reached $203,000, he sat down heavily on our couch and put his head in his hands. The conversation that followed was the most painful of my life. Garrett didn't yell or become angry. He just looked devastated and confused, like someone trying to understand how the person he'd lived with for 3 years could be a complete stranger. You let me believe you were successful while you were actually destroying our financial future, he said. You let me work extra hours to support a lifestyle that was bankrupting us. I wanted to tell you, I said, though this wasn't entirely true. But once it started, I didn't know how to stop without losing everything. Garrett's response was simple and devastating. Sienna, you've already lost everything. The question is whether you're going to take me down with you. The divorce was filed 2 months later. Garrett kept his promotion and his legitimate career, while I was left with $203,000 in debt, and no source of income to pay it. The fake influencer lifestyle that had seemed so glamorous became a prison of financial obligations that would take years to resolve. I had to declare bankruptcy and move back in with my parents, while Garrett rebuilt his life with someone who appreciated his genuine success rather than envying it enough to fabricate her own. I deleted my fake Instagram account the day Garrett moved out, watching my purchase followers disappear with the click of a button. The 3 years I'd spent staging photos and creating fictional partnerships had produced nothing but debt and destroyed relationships. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been honest about my lack of success from the beginning, but mostly I try not to think about the life I lost by pretending to be someone I wasn't. The real Sienna Vale has 47 followers and works part-time at a coffee shop, while paying off debt that will follow me for the next decade. The fake Sienna Vale was a millionaire influencer with everything I thought I wanted. Turns out, the cost of living someone else's life is higher than anything credit cards can cover.